Welcome back to section 2 of combine calibrations along with your 600 series HydroFlex headers. We're going to talk about setting and calibrating your header in auxiliary height sensing mode, which is what we consider having a cutter bar in the rigid mode and then running off of an auxiliary height sensor, which would be this arm here. So to start with, of course, you take your head and hopefully you'd have your lockouts off from the fall before. And so with your lockouts off, if you lower your HydroFlex pressure, it's much easier to get the pin out from behind your arm when your arm's stored in the upright position. So when your header's flexed down, you can pull the pin out very easily, and then you can store the pin on the peg behind the arm. So we'll store our pin there. Okay, so then after we have our arms loosened and hanging down, we're going to want to make sure that they move freely, because after they've been stored up there for that long, it's very possible it's been seized or stuck. And so we want to make sure also that we'll catch this grease zerk on each one of these arms. And we can grease that and pump it a few times to move that grease through there and make sure that it comes back under its own power. That's very important, otherwise we will not calibrate and we'll get error messages for that reason. So once we get all three of our arms down and they're freed up and everything looks good, we'll go in the cab. We can raise our HydroFlex pressure all the way to the top, which is anywhere, depending which machine, from 2750 to 3000 psi. The max pressure is not what's very important, just to make sure your cutter bar gets sucked up when you do that. Once you get that sucked up, we'll go ahead and make sure we got our header locked up and rigid. And so with that, we've got a bolt on 3 arms, which would be one on each side and one in the center, that you just simply run a bolt in. And then the other 4, I believe, on a 35-foot header have a black arm C-clamp style like this that will go over your beam to hold those ones into rigid. So basically every other lateral beam here has a lockout on it. So now our header's locked in full rigid mode. It will be able to just sense only the auxiliary height sensors. So with that being said, we can go ahead and get in the cab, and we're going to attempt to calibrate this combine for auxiliary height sensors. So on this machine, also one thing we need to note is back to our auxiliary height sensors, which is this wire right here. It's a 3-pin weather pack connector. It's got yellow tape on it, but don't always feel that yours should have yellow tape on it. There, once again, earlier models that could possibly be on the right side may not have a yellow tape on it. But anything in the later models have a yellow tape on it, and it's a jumper lead just like this. And inside there's the 3 wires for our auxiliary sensors, one for each sensor for the sense wire. So we got to make sure that that is plugged in and is ready to be communicating with the controllers on the combine so that it can see the height sensors reading. So now we're in the cab of our 70 series combine, and we're going to attempt to calibrate this header so that we can run on our auxiliary height sensors for a wheat harvest. So what we need to do is we can either scroll across here to our diagnostics and calibration, or we could use our quick button up here too and get to calibrations page. So now we are on calibrations. We'll have to scroll around into here, into this box, open it up, and we're going to have to find our header calibration, which is right there. Now it says we're able to continue with our calibration with our combine on level ground and engine running at high idle. So we'll bring her up to high idle, and we can go ahead and enter through. Okay, and the first thing it wants us to do is decrease our cutter bar pressure below 1000 psi. So we can go ahead and push our HydroFlex pressure button right here, and now we can go ahead and turn our pressure down. And once we get below that 1000 psi, it will allow us to continue on. And that pressure can be seen in the upper right corner of your top display. And there we're below, and now it gave me the next page, which says to lower the feeder house and the header resting on the ground. So we're going to lower us down. Want to make sure that header is all the way on the ground there. and we'll go to the next page. Now we're going to press and hold the header raise. And at that particular time, we have our auto height control rigid mode is calibrated, telling us that we are running on our auxiliary sensors in rigid mode. So we go ahead and enter through, and now we'll have to make sure we scroll over to here to enter to save the calibration values that we just achieved. So we'll enter that, and now we can go ahead to our home page. In the event, however, if we were unable to calibrate and it told us that we had a voltage out of range on, let's say, a left center or right sensor, there's a page on this command center that we can see the values of those sensors very easily. So we'll go to here and we'll get to page 4, or I'm sorry, page 3 is where our diagnostic readings would be. So we'll go to here, we'll open up this box, and we'll want to go to the 600 in rigid mode right here instead of the 600 flex. So we want to make sure we choose 600 rigid in our case with the auxiliary sensors. We will open that up, and now we will enter that through. And when we get to page 6, there will be the values of those sensors that we're looking for, along with a bunch of other values that could be handy, and depending on what type of diagnostics you may need to do on your machine. But on page 6 is where we're looking for our voltage values. So right here on this page it tells us our left rigid height sensor value, our center rigid height sensor, and our right rigid height sensor. And so we can watch those values move as we use our header up and down here. And so we can see that our values, drop down to a little under 1.5 volts when the header's down, and then we can see that our values come up to close to 3 or better when its header's above and the arms are fully extended. And so this page is very helpful in deciding which sensor, or if you have any sensors out of range. And so on this page, when the header's fully up, you cannot have any values above 4.5 volts. And also when the header's fully down, you cannot have any values below 0.5 volts. If you do have that, then that would be the sensor or the area of the header that's giving you the trouble, and then that would be the time when you need to inspect that and or adjust those sensors accordingly. But to reiterate that this is the page that's very helpful in diagnosing header height sensor issues on a 70 series combine. So now that we've got our header calibrated to our combine, we're going to go ahead and discuss a little bit about which icons on our top display that are important and what their function is when we have them turned on. So starting on our upper left corner here is our header height sensing button. So when we turn that on, you'll see that we get an icon that shows up on the middle of the screen. Now that icon's important if we're going to attempt to use our number 2 or 3 buttons and use them with header height sensing, whether it be in auxiliary or in hydroflex mode. We need to have that icon turned on. So below that button is our feeder house angle sensor. Now that button's important to be used on when we use our number 1 button on our hydro handle, and that is for our feeder house angle, as in when we were to use it as an end of row function, let's say, to turn around the machine and go back the other way, we'd use it, and it would raise the header up based on the feeder house angle, and you can adjust that to wherever you'd like when we're engaged, which we'll show a little bit later on. In the middle center upper button is basically our dial of speed functionality, and we can adjust that also with the knob over on the side here as far as how fast or slow we want our ratio to be with our dial of speed here. And we can have that function turned on or off. So below that will be our contour master icon, and in order for us to show that our contour master is on and ready to be used, we need basically the arrow to show up underneath here. This icon will never go away when it's turned off. The icon will always stay on for the picture. It's we're looking for the arrow underneath it to show that it's on and ready. The upper right button, which is a little deceiving because it looks just like our hydroflex pressure button, but that button is actually for use when you have a rigid header and you're going to attempt to use that in float mode and ride that header right on the ground. So it's different than a HydroFlex button, and so that situation is not very common in our area, and so we will almost 99% of the time never use this button. So we will leave that off at all times. And then the bottom right button will be our real fore and aft position selector, preset position, so that with our buttons number 2 and 3 on the hydro handle, we can attempt to reach that position of that reel where we had previously stored it. So when we have that on, we can move our reel to which position, wherever we'd like it, to go and to correlate with your number 2 button, let's say. So we would move our reel where we like it, and then we can hold our number 2 button for 5 seconds, and it will store that position. So every time you have the icon on and you push your number 2 button, your reel will go to the desired position that you have saved it at. So now that we've talked about all the buttons that we use, it's important to know that we should have, at least these 3 on. One would be our contour master. The second one would be our feeder house angle sensor, and the third one would be our header height sensors. So we have those icons turned on now, and so a way to test all that in the yard, so we can go ahead and engage our front end, and once we have our front end engaged, our buttons will respond accordingly. So let's test our number 2 button and adjust that height for us. So when I push the number 2 button, you can see the items that are taking effect and are active right now. And those are the ones that have the arrows, black arrows pointing to that function. So right now our contour master is active, our reel fore and aft is active, and our header height sensors are active at the present time. And so now I'm going to go ahead and adjust my height on my number 2. This tells me that I'm on my number 2 button right now. So I'm going to adjust my height to my number 2 button by turning my AHC knob. And I'm going to raise my header up, and so it gives me a value of 2.4. That necessarily doesn't mean 2.4 inches. It's just a value on our graph here. So we can see that I have raised it up and I'm still in active mode on my header height sensors, my reel fore aft and height position, and my contour master. So now I have preset a number 3 button to a different value, and when I use my number 3 button, you're going to see this change to number 3. My height will be different, and my reel fore and aft is actually going to move because it's set to a different position. And so there I've gone to a different position with my reel fore aft and my height all in one button push. So I can still see that these are all active at the present time, and that's with button number 3. Now when I go to a button number 1, is going to be responding to my feeder house angle, which is what we're going to see change now. So when I go to button number 1, my header's going to come up, and you can see that I'm actually running on my feeder house angle is active, and I'm not running on my header height sensors. And my contour master is also not active when I'm on using my button number 1. And so my button number 1 I can lower back down just to any height desired for when I come to the end of the row to turn around. And so just to capitalize, then we'll go back to number 2 when we get turned around, which will also engage our auto steer. And now you can see that I'm back to using header height sensors because they're active on my screen. And I do not ever at any time have this rigid header in float mode button turned on. When that button's turned on, you'll lose your button 3 functionality on your HydroFlex handle, or on your hydro handle, and then you'll also screw up your functionality of your number 2 button. So just be sure that we're not using that button on the screen. With that, I believe that will conclude our informative video on calibrating HydroFlex header to a 70 series and 50s and 60 series combines. Thank you.